Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back for the final reading of The Smoky God, A Voyage to the Inner World by Willis George Emerson. I've only been taking it one chapter at a time, but I'm going to share the last three chapters today because they're all pretty short chapters and it wouldn't make sense for me to do three separate videos. As with all of the rest of the videos, yes, in the midst of the reading, I can't help myself. I will be inserting some commentary on each section, and I'm going to warn you in advance that chapter 6 is going to have a relatively large amount of commentary from me simply because I disagree with the summation of it. So you'll see what I'm getting to when we're there. But and not to say this isn't a good book, just that I disagree with a lot of chapter 6. And most of you will probably guess that it has a lot to do. Most of it has to do with cosmology. But anyway, let's get started. Part 5, Among the Ice Packs. For the next 45 days, our time was employed in dodging icebergs and hunting channels. Indeed, had we not been favored with a strong south wind and a small boat, I doubt if this story could have ever been given to the world. At last there came a morning when my father said, "My son, I think we are to see home. We are almost through the ice. See, the open water lies before us." However, there were a few icebergs that had floated far northward into the open water still ahead of us on either side, stretching away for many miles. Directly in front of us, and by the compass, which had now righted itself due north, there was an open sea. "What a wonderful story we have to tell the people of Stockholm," continued my father, while a look of pardonable elation lighted up his honest face. "And I think of the gold nuggets stowed away in the hold." I spoke kind words of praise to my father, not alone for this fortitude and endurance, but also for his courageous daring as a discoverer, and for having made the voyage that now promised a successful end. I was grateful, too, that he had gathered the wealth of gold we were carrying home. While congratulating ourselves on the goodly supply of provisions and water we still had on hand, and on the dangers we had escaped, we were startled by hearing a most terrific explosion, caused by the tearing apart of a huge mountain of ice. It was a deafening roar, like the firing of a thousand cannons. We were sailing at the time with great speed, and happened to be near a monstrous iceberg, which to all appearances was as immovable as a rock-bound island. It seemed, however, that the iceberg had split and was breaking apart, whereupon the balance of the monster along which we were sailing was destroyed, and it began dipping away from us. My father quickly anticipated the danger before I realized its awful possibilities. The iceberg extended down into the water many hundreds of feet, and as it tipped over, the portion coming up out of the water caught our fishing craft like a lever on a fulcrum, and threw it into the air as if it had been a football. Our boat fell back on the iceberg, that by this time had changed the side next to us for the top. My father was still in the boat, having become entangled in the rigging, while I was thrown some 20 feet away. I quickly scrambled to my feet and shouted to my father, who answered, "All is well." Just then a realization dawned upon me. Horror upon horror. The blood froze in my veins. The iceberg was still in motion, and its great weight and force in toppling over would cause it to submerge temporarily. I fully realized what a sucking maelstrom it would produce amid the worlds of water on every side. They would rush into the depression in all their fury, like white-fanged wolves eager for human prey. In this supreme moment of mental anguish, I remember glancing at our boat, which was lying on its side, and wondering if it could possibly right itself, and if my father could escape. Was this the end of our struggles and adventures? Was this death? All these questions flashed through my mind in the fraction of a second, and a moment later I was engaged in a life and death struggle. The ponderous monolith of ice sank below the surface, and the frigid waters gurgled around me in frenzied anger. I was in a saucer, with the waters pouring in on every side. A moment more, and I lost consciousness. When I partially recovered my senses and roused from the swoon of a half-drowned man, I found myself wet, stiff, and almost frozen, lying on the iceberg. But there was no sign of my father or of our little fishing sloop. The monster berg had recovered itself, and with its new balance, lifted its head perhaps 50 feet above the waves. The top of this island of ice was a plateau perhaps half an acre in extent. I loved my father well, and was grief-stricken at the awfulness of his death. I railed at fate that I too had not been permitted to sleep with him in the depths of the ocean. Finally I climbed to my feet and looked about me. The purple-domed sky above, the shoreless green ocean beneath, and only an occasional iceberg discernible. My heart sank in hopeless despair. I cautiously picked my way across the berg toward the other side, hoping that our fishing craft had righted itself. Dared I think it possible that my father still lived? It was but a ray of hope that flamed up in my heart. But the anticipation warmed my blood in my veins and started it rushing like some rare stimulant through every fiber of my body. I crept close to the precipitous side of the iceberg and peered far down, hoping, still hoping. Then I made a circle of the berg, scanning every foot of the way, and thus I kept going, around and around. One part of my brain was certainly becoming maniacal, while the other part, I believe, and do to this day, was perfectly rational. I was conscious of having made the circuit a dozen times, and while one part of my intelligence knew, in all reason, there was not a vestige of hope, yet some strange, fascinating aberration bewitched and compelled me still to beguile myself with expectation. The other part of my brain seemed to tell me that while there was no possibility of my father being alive, yet if I quit making the circuitous pilgrimage, if I paused for a single moment, it would be acknowledgment of defeat, and should I do this, I felt that I should go mad. Thus hour after hour I walked around and around, afraid to stop and rest, yet physically powerless to continue much longer. Oh, horror of horrors! To be cast away in this wide expanse of waters without food or drink, and only a treacherous iceberg for an abiding place. My heart sank within me, and all semblance of hope was fading into black despair. Then the hand of the deliverer was extended, and the death-like stillness of a solitude rapidly becoming unbearable was suddenly broken by the firing of a signal gun. I looked up in startled amazement when I saw, less than a half-mile away, a whaling vessel bearing down toward me with her sail full set. Evidently, my continued activity on iceberg had attracted their attention. On drawing near, they put out a boat, and descending cautiously to the water's edge, I was rescued, and a little later lifted on board the whaling ship. I found it was a Scotch whaler, the Arlington. She had cleared from Dundee in September and started immediately for the Antarctic in search of whales. The captain, Angus McPherson, seemed kindly disposed, but in matters of discipline, as I soon learned, possessed of an iron will. When I attempted to tell him that I had come from the inside of the earth, the captain and mate looked at each other, shook their heads, and insisted on my being put in a bunk under strict surveillance of the ship's physician. I was very weak for want of food, and had not slept for many hours. However, after a few days' rest, I got up one morning and dressed myself without asking permission of the physician or anyone else, and told them that I was as sane as anyone. The captain sent for me and again questioned me concerning where I had come from, and how I came to be alone on an iceberg in the far-off Antarctic Ocean. I replied that I had just come from the inside of the earth, and proceeded to tell him how my father and myself had gone in by way of Spitzbergen and come out by way of the South Pole country, whereupon I was put in irons. I afterward heard the captain tell the mate that I was as crazy as a March hare, and that I must remain in confinement until I was rational enough to give a truthful account of myself. Finally, after much pleading and many promises, I was released from irons. I then and there decided to invent some story that would satisfy the captain, and never again refer to my trip to the land of the Smoky God, at least until I was safe among friends. Within a fortnight I was permitted to go about and take my place as one of the seamen. A little later, the captain asked me for an explanation. I told him that my experience had been so horrible that I was fearful of my memory, and begged him to permit me to leave the question unanswered until sometime in the future. "I think you are recovering considerably," he said, "but you are not sane yet by a good deal." "Permit me to do such works as you may assign," I replied, "and if it does not compensate you sufficiently, I will pay you immediately after I reach Stockholm, to the last penny." Thus the matter rested. On finally reaching Stockholm, as I have already related, I found that my good mother had gone on to her reward more than a year before. I have also told how, later, the treachery of a relative landed me in a madhouse, where I remained for 28 years, seemingly unending years, and still later, after my release, how I returned to the life of a fisherman, following it sedulously for 27 years, then how I came to America, and finally to Los Angeles, California. But all this can be of little interest to the reader. Indeed, it seems to me the climax of my wonderful travels and strange adventures was reached when the Scotch sailing vessel took me from an iceberg on the Antarctic Ocean. Part 6, Conclusion. And I am just going to, before I start reading, remind you that there is much that I disagree with in this chapter, but I want to read the entire book to you, so I am going to include this. And of course, the images that I am going to share here reflect more of my thoughts regarding this topic. So let's get started reading. In concluding this history of my adventures, I wish to state that I firmly believe science is yet in its infancy concerning the cosmology of the earth. There is so much that is unaccounted for by the world's accepted knowledge of today, and will ever remain so until the land of the Smoky God is known and recognized by our geographers. It is the land from whence came the great logs of cedar that have been found by explorers in open waters far over the northern edge of the earth's crust, and also the bodies of mammoths whose bones are found in vast beds on the Siberian coast. Northern explorers have done much. Sir John Franklin, De Haven Grinnell, Sir John Murray, Kane, Melville, Hall, Nansen, Schwatka, Greely, Parry, Ross, Gerlach, Bernacchi, Andre, Amsden, Amundsen, and others have all been striving to storm the frozen citadel of mystery. I firmly believe that Andre and two brave companions, Strindberg and Frankel, who sailed away in the balloon Orion from the northwest coast of Spitzbergen on that Sunday afternoon of July 11th, 1897, are now in the within world, and doubtless are being entertained as my father and myself were entertained by the kind-hearted giant race inhabiting the inner Atlantic continent. Having, in my humble way, devoted years to these problems, I am well acquainted with the accepted definitions of gravity, as well as the cause of the magnetic needle's attraction, and I am prepared to say that it is my firm belief that the magnetic needle is influenced solely by electric currents, which completely envelop the earth like a garment, and that these electric currents in an endless circuit pass out of the southern end of the earth's cylindrical opening, diffusing and spreading themselves over all the outside surface, and rushing madly on in their course toward the North Pole. And while these currents seemingly dash off into space at the earth's curve, or edge, yet they drop again to the inside surface and continue their way southward along the inside of the earth's crust toward the opening of the so-called pole. I just want to interject here that I think that he is on the right track when it has to do with electrical currents, but he kind of just loses it, at least in my opinion, when he can't stop thinking of the earth in a spherical way. As to gravity, no one knows what it is. I might add also Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't know what it is. He just so much as admitted it in a radio interview when he was asked, "What is gravity?" And he said, "What is gravity? No idea. Next question." And he acted like he was joking, but he went on to give a completely nonsensical answer that showed that he really had no clue what he was talking about. So anyway, I'm just going to continue on. As to gravity, no one knows what it is because it has not been determined whether it is atmospheric pressure that causes the apple to fall, or whether 150 miles below the surface of the Earth, supposedly one halfway through the Earth's crust, there exists some powerful lodestone attraction that draws it. Therefore, whether the apple, when it leaves the limb of the tree, is drawn or impelled downward to the nearest point of resistance is unknown to the students of physics. I'm just going to interject here that it is far more likely that it is just density and buoyancy. And the easiest way to describe density is that if something is heavier than air, it falls. If it is lighter than air, it floats. That's how simple it is. It doesn't have to be this convoluted thing that nobody can define called gravity. I tend to call gravity the catch-all. uh, the catch-all solution to everything that science can't explain. If they can't explain something, they just throw something in about gravity. And apparently gravity has all sorts of things that it can do, and it never seems to be the same thing. Okay, ran over, moving on. Sir James Ross claimed to have discovered the magnetic pole at about 74 degrees latitude. This is wrong. The magnetic pole is exactly one half the distance through the Earth's crust. Thus, if the Earth's crust is 300 miles in thickness, which is the distance I estimate it to be, then the magnetic pole is undoubtedly 150 miles below the surface of the Earth. It matters not where the test is made. And at this particular point, 150 miles below the surface, gravity ceases, becomes neutralized, and when we pass beyond that point on toward the inside surface of the Earth, a reverse attraction geometrically increases in power until the other 150 miles of distance is traversed, which would bring us out on the inside of the Earth. Completely convoluted when you think about it. Thus, if a hole were bored down through the Earth's crust at London, Paris, New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles, a distance of 300 miles, it would connect the two surfaces. While the inertia and momentum of a weight dropped in from the outside surface would carry it far past the magnetic center, yet before reaching the inside surface of the Earth, it would gradually diminish in speed. After passing the halfway point, finally pause and immediately fall back toward the outside surface and continue thus to oscillate, like the swinging of a pendulum with the power removed, until it would finally rest at the magnetic center, or at that particular point exactly one half the distance between the outside surface and the inside surface of the Earth. Okay, I need to stop here again. So first of all, this image is showing where they, just an artistic rendering of about how far they've dug so far. It's been less than 8 miles. So what they tell us about what the interior of the Earth looks like has never actually been physically proven. Yes, they use computer models, but it has not physically been proven. So what we very often teach our children as facts about what the inside of the Earth looks like is speculation. And I was guilty of this too. I homeschool my children. We went through an entire Earth science unit study many years ago, and I taught my children the layers of the Earth, and this is pretty much what it looked like. But we don't actually know that that's what it looks like. Let's keep that in mind. Also, the paragraph that I just read was, I think, a very confusing way to try to explain why they claim that you can go down to the center of the Earth, but then somehow when you come back out, like if you fall down to the center of the Earth, you're suddenly going to flip and fall the other way. And then what do? Climb out the other side? No, I'm sorry. The entire thing, it makes absolutely no sense. The gyration of the Earth in its daily act of whirling around in its spiral rotation at a rate greater than 1,000 miles every hour, or about 17 miles per second, makes of it a vast electro-generating body, a huge machine, a mighty prototype of the puny man-made dynamo which at best is but a feeble imitation of nature's original. And I'm just going to point out that this is actually what happens when there is water on a spinning ball. It doesn't stick to it, it goes flying everywhere. The valleys of this inner Atlantis continent, bordering the upper waters of the farthest north, are in season covered with the most magnificent and luxuriant flowers. Not hundreds and thousands, but millions of acres, from which the pollen or blossoms are carried far away in almost every direction by the earth's spiral gyrations and the agitation of the wind resulting therefrom. And it is these blossoms or pollen from the vast floral meadows within that produce the colored snows of the Arctic regions that have so mystified the northern explorers. Beyond question, this new land within is the home, the cradle of the human race, and viewed from the standpoint of the discoveries made by us, must of necessity have a most important bearing on all physical, paleontological, archaeological, philological, and mythological theories of antiquity. The same idea of going back to the land of mystery, to the very beginning, to the origin of man, is found in Egyptian traditions of the earlier terrestrial regions of the gods, heroes, and men, from the historical fragments of Manetho, fully verified by the historical records taken from the more recent excavations of Pompeii, as well as traditions of the North American Indians. It is now 1 hour past midnight. The new year of 1908 is here, and this is the third day thereof. And having at last finished the record of my strange travels and adventures I wish given to the world, I am ready, and even longing, for the peaceful rest which I am sure will follow life's trials and vicissitudes. I am old in years, and ripe both with adventures and sorrows, yet rich with the few friends I have cemented to me in my struggles to lead a just and upright life. Like a story that is well nigh told, my life is ebbing away. The presentiment is strong within me that I shall not live to see the rising of another sun. Thus do I conclude my message. Olaf Jansen. And now we are starting part 7, the final part, the final chapter, the author's afterword. I found much difficulty in deciphering and editing the manuscripts of Olaf Jansen. However, I have taken the liberty of reconstructing only a very few expressions, and in doing this have in no way changed the spirit or meaning. Otherwise, the original text has neither been added to nor taken from. It is impossible for me to express my opinion as to the value or reliability of the wonderful statements made by Olaf Jansen. The description here given of the strange lands and people visited by him, location of cities, the names and directions of rivers, and other information herein combined, conform in every way to the rough drawings given into my custody by this ancient Norseman, which drawings together with the manuscript, it is my intention, at some later date, to give to the Smithsonian Institution. Big mistake. That's my words. That's a big mistake. Don't give anything of value to the Smithsonian Institution because it will disappear. Anyway, continuing. To the Smithsonian Institution to preserve or lose for the benefit of those interested in the mysteries of the farthest north, the frozen circle of silence. It is certain there are many things in Vedic literature, in Josephus, the Odyssey, the Iliad, Terrien de la Coupery's early history of Chinese civilization, Flammarion's astronomical myths, Lenormand's beginnings of the history, Hesiod's Theogony, Sir John de Montville's writings, and Sayce's records of the past, that, to say the least, are strangely in harmony with the seemingly incredible text found in the yellow manuscript of the old Norseman, Olaf Jansen, and now for the first time given to the world. The end. I hope that you all enjoyed this reading. It was a fantastic book, even though like I mentioned before, I don't agree with the cosmological aspect of it. But, you can't blame him because that's what most of us thought at one point or another. But yeah, very intriguing story, and it does really make you wonder how much truth there is to it. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work, I recently opened memberships here on YouTube, so you can check that out. And I hope you have a great day.